coming up.
My son was the light. I have to carry his light forward.
Remembering the loss.
The pain was so big.
And revealing the failures.
Okay.
Of a deep-sea disaster.
The sub was screaming at them, but nobody was listening.
That never should have happened.
I'm hopeful that the people that enabled Stockton can be brought to account.
He was borderline psychopath.
That's next on 60 Minutes.
2 years ago this past week, the United States Coast Guard was tasked with leading the search for the submersible Titan, missing on an expedition to the wreck of the Titanic. At first, there was hope the experimental craft could be rescued. But sadly, we now know 90 minutes into its journey, 3 kilometres below the surface, Titan imploded. All 5 men on board were killed. Among them was Stockton Rush, the boss of Oceangate, the company which built the doomed sub. Not surprisingly, he's been a focus of the Coast Guard's investigation into what went wrong. Its official report is expected imminently, but already this disaster seems to be a case of ego overruling expertise. There's something soothing about the British countryside. The tranquility and fresh air are exactly what Christine Darwood needs to keep putting one foot in front of the other.
I think if I would have told them to come, they would have walked with me too.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know it when you first meet her, but beneath Christine's big smile and infectious enthusiasm, this wife and mother has been to hell and back. Her husband, Shahzada, and 19-year-old son, Suleiman, were on board Oceangate's Titan submersible when it imploded while descending to the Titanic wreck.
If you would have lost them in any other accident, you know, the outcome would have been the same. They would have been gone, the rooms would be empty. But the whole public nature of it was very, very difficult.
Rescuers are racing to find the missing dive vessel.
But the US Coast Guard is not letting up.
Tonight, explosive new details from the US Coast Guard investigation. Oceangate insiders on why years of warnings were ignored.
There is failure on every level.
And why no one could stop the boss of the operation, Stockton Rush.
And wondered if he was borderline a psychopath.
Christine Darwood is still trying to process the sudden and horrific loss of her loved ones. When we catch up with her, roughly halfway through an 800-kilometre hike from London to Glasgow, she's weary but determined. This was a walk she'd planned to do with her son, Suleiman. Why did you decide to do this walk?
He messaged me one day and he says, "Mother, is it possible to walk from London to Glasgow, where his university was?" And I'm like, "Sure you can. I mean, you know, you can walk that." So after the tragedy, we wanted to plan, but he wanted to walk simply because he loved walking, and so we thought it would be a nice thing to walk together.
A mother-son bonding experience that wasn't to be.
We loved talking about life. Sometimes your mind does go into a dark place. Sometimes it becomes so overwhelming that you have to stop and then just sit down and either talk about it with the people around you who know you, or sometimes you cry.
Was Suleiman adventurous by nature?
He was very wise for his age. He was a people's person. You could have a really fun time, like laugh until your belly hurts. But you could also sit with him and have like more serious conversations. He was just generally a very, curious, open person.
It was that sense of curiosity that prompted the teenager to join his dad, London businessman Shahzada Darwood, on board Oceangate's tourist submersible for a deep-sea dive to the Titanic. Christine had planned to go with her husband, but when Suleiman turned 18, he asked his parents if he could go in her place.
It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
On June 18, 2023, along with British billionaire Hamish Harding and dive veteran Paul-Henri Nargeolet, they set off on what was to be an epic undersea adventure, with Oceangate's maverick CEO, Stockton Rush, at the helm.
Taking a completely new approach to the sub design, and it's all run with this game controller and these touch screens. So if you want to go forward, you press forward. If you want to go back, you go back. And it's meant for a 16-year-old to throw it around, and super durable. We keep a couple of spares on board just in case.
The passengers, who Oceangate called mission specialists, each paid more than $250,000 for their place in history.
Officials say that the sub went missing about an hour and 45 minutes into its descent.
We now know their adventure and their lives ended a mere 90 minutes into the dive. But at the time, a frantic international search and rescue operation swung into full force, scouring the ocean for the missing Titan, as the world's media speculated about how much oxygen might be left on board.
We're told at this point it could be anywhere from about 54 to 80 hours of oxygen left.
It was 4 days before the US Coast Guard confirmed what many feared.
The all-out search for a missing submersible with 5 people on board leads to a tragic discovery, and there are no survivors.
For the past 2 years, the US Coast Guard has been examining every aspect of Oceangate's operations to determine what caused the tragedy and who, if anyone, should be held accountable. What it's revealed so far is staggering. During 13 successful dives to the Titanic in 2021 and 2022, the Titan had close to 120 equipment issues, including failing batteries, problems with its thrusters and the hull. But even before then, there were clear signs of trouble. Trouble that boss Stockton Rush refused to acknowledge.
We've learned that things inside Oceangate were a lot worse than any of us ever suspected. Every sub they built, test or operational, displayed the same pattern, and they just ignored it. The sub was screaming at them, but nobody was listening.
Few people know the perils of deep-sea exploration as well as Rob McCallum. A world-renowned submersible expert, Rob has led several expeditions to the Titanic. He consulted for Oceangate from 2009, but left the company in 2016 over safety issues. What was your main concern about the design of Titan?
The core problem here is that carbon fibre is not an appropriate material for massive compression stresses like you find in a deep diving submarine. And, you know, it could be that the hull was flexing against the titanium end caps in a manner that allowed failure of the pressure vessel. It could be that the titanium ring that was put onto the hull, the way it was glued in, failed. It could be that the carbon fibre itself just had a weakness in it and ruptured, but it doesn't change the outcome. And this was something that was absolutely avoidable. It was well predicted years in advance.
I've broken some rules to make this. Carbon fiber and titanium, there's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did. It's picking the rules that you break that are the ones that will add value to others and add value to society.
Cost cutting, bad engineering decisions, the desire to get to the Titanic as quickly as they could to start making profit.
The construction was a concern for many former Oceangate employees who gave evidence at the Coast Guard public hearing.
We all voiced concerns about what was happening in terms of the engineering of Titan.
The company's former head of marine operations, Dave Lockridge, raised serious safety issues about the vessel's hull in 2018 and was promptly sacked. Another harsh critic of the Oceangate operation is submersible builder Carl Stanley. He told the Coast Guard he heard the hull of the Titan cracking on a test dive with Stockton Rush in 2019, 4 years before the tragedy.
We got down there and it's making noises that, you know, the sound of a carbon fiber band breaking.
Days after the 2023 implosion, he described to 60 Minutes the terrifying sound that still haunts him.
I would say every 3 to 4 minutes there was loud gunshot-like noises. That's a heck of a sound to hear when you're that far under the ocean in a craft that has only been down that deep once before.
Carl's experience so affected him that, like Dave Lockridge and Rob McCallum, he told Stockton Rush, in no uncertain terms, his vessel wouldn't be fit to take passengers, and pushing forward with Titanic tourism dives would likely end in catastrophe. But as you'll see, nothing and no one could convince Stockton Rush to slow down. Not even his own engineering director.
He wanted to do something different, and he wanted to make a name for himself. I often wondered, just in his actions, if he was borderline a psychopath.
Despite countless safety warnings from Oceangate insiders and industry experts, on June 18, 2023, the Titan submersible set off to the Titanic wreck, piloted by Stockton Rush and carrying 4 paying passengers.
Titan, topside, Titan.
Monitoring their dive from support ship, the Polar Prince, was the company's tracking and communications team, including Stockton's wife and Oceangate director, Wendy Rush.
Yeah, see where it moves around.
In this video, recently tendered to the US Coast Guard investigation, Wendy hears a sudden pop.
400 meters to go.
We should be about 500 meters, 30. What was that guy?
You could blink and miss it, but this is the fatal moment the Titan was lost. For submersible expert Rob McCallum, it's distressing to watch. It's quite eerie in hindsight, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, she's heard the bang, but she doesn't understand where it's come from. Ships are noisy places, but if you know what an implosion sounds like, it sounds exactly like that.
Titan dropped 2 weights.
Copy. Titan dropped 2 weights.
After hearing the bang, the monitoring team reported that the sub had dropped weights.
So he meant to go down fairly light.
It was normal procedure, but within moments, the Titan's communication and tracking system went dark.
Roger that. Thank you for confirming.
4 days later, the obliterated remains of the Titan were found on the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean. What was left of the vessel and the 5 men on board came to rest just 500 metres from their intended destination, the wreck of the mighty Titanic.
100% avoidable. 100% avoidable. They had the data in front of them.
As Oceangate's chief engineer from 2016 to 2019, Tony Nissen worked closely with Stockton Rush. He built the Titan's first carbon fibre hull and implemented a monitoring system to detect if the structure was compromised. Back then, Tony and Stockton Rush were joined by engineers from Boeing to test the Titan's hull under pressure. A new Netflix documentary about the disaster shows the results were alarming.
Let's just see how she settles down, but that's a lot of events.
Yeah, you don't want to.
Okay.
Where did it go to?
Went to 4,000. Yeah, about 4,009.
So at least you know acoustic monitoring works.
What is happening?
Ideally in acoustic or in carbon fiber structures, when they break or they crack, which they will, when put under tension or compression, any kind of load, you will get some breakage. Eventually it should stop. Will send off a noise, a pop. There's glue is separating and fibers are breaking. It's just that simple, and it's loud. And so Stockton and I, we kind of looked at each other and thought, oh my God, that's louder than we thought it was going to be.
I would say that was it.
Surprisingly, Tony says he had no concerns about the Titan's construction or safety because the monitoring system worked. Would you say you were confident with the build and you were confident with the engineering and you were confident with the hull? You weren't concerned about those things?
No.
Despite the noises, the acoustic monitoring?
Those were expected. What we wanted to see was an attenuation or a reduction in the number of them, and we were starting to see that. The hull was built with a meaningful safety factor. The data didn't concern me. The strain data didn't concern me. It was working like it was intended to work.
But his confidence wouldn't last when testing went from the lab to the ocean, with Stockton at the helm.
I've never heard a noise so horrific. I can't imagine what it would have been like inside the sub itself. That's the sound of your death approaching. That at any second, that hull is going to implode. And it did.
For Rob McCallum, that was the moment Oceangate should have pulled the sub out of the water for good.
I don't know anybody in the professional field that would have got into that submersible. And if they had, once they heard those sounds, they'd still be running now. It's absolutely terrifying sound.
And what do you say to those who would say the testing system was doing its job? Every submersible makes noises at depth.
I mean, that's just not the case. I've been as deep as it's possible for a human being to go, and the sub was absolutely silent because it was made of titanium. When you are hearing those particular sounds, which are the sounds of the hull itself under great stress, that's alarming. You just never know when it's going to fail, but it is a certainty that it will fail.
But Tony vehemently disagrees.
The entire vehicle worked like it was supposed to. It gave me the data that I could interpret to prevent an accident.
He wasn't concerned by the noises, but he was worried when other measurements showed the hull was degrading. Stockton Rush, though, insisted he could still take passengers all the way down to the Titanic. By 2019, Tony knew they had a serious problem and had to act.
The data that I was looking at was it's moving more than it should. It was making more noise than we thought it would. And that's why I canceled or did not let Stockton go to Titanic in 2019.
He took his concerns to Stockton Rush and, like many employees before him, was sacked.
He wanted me to be the pilot that runs the Titanic missions. And I told him I'm not getting in it.
Tony remains furious. He told the Coast Guard inquiry he believed in the project and felt the problems could have been fixed. He says Oceangate's culture was the real reason for the disaster. What could have stopped this?
They shouldn't have fired me. Like, we built a system that did exactly what they ordered and prevented this tragedy from happening a few years earlier. And we were brave enough to do so. And it worked. It 100% worked. And I think, and that's not being addressed anywhere.
The chief investigator of the US Coast Guard will hand down his report within weeks. He's told us the entire Oceangate operation was dysfunctional, and he's been especially stunned by the fact that in the years leading up to the implosion, there was a total lack of maintenance carried out on the Titan's hull. He says if Stockton Rush were alive today, the Coast Guard would recommend a manslaughter charge. The question now is whether members of Oceangate's board or members of staff who fail to act will be held accountable. For those suffering the consequences of Stockton Rush's reckless ambition, there's no outcome that would ease their grief.
The loss was so great, that the pain was so big, that I rather wanted to concentrate on the positives and the things also that I could control. I have the power to be grateful. I didn't want to get bitter.
Christine Darwood tries not to dwell on what happened to her husband and son, Shahzada and Suleiman, in the doomed submersible.
My son was the light, right? So I have to carry his light forward. Finding new purpose is, I think, a key. I think Suleiman would be quite proud of me. Yeah.
Would you like to see criminal charges recommended? Does that help you and your family in any way?
I just don't want this to happen again. If that needs to happen in order to change policies, then yes.
You can only use the word accident when it's something that was unexpected and initially unexplained. But in this case, this was predicted, and anything that's predictable is avoidable. And I want that to be the last word on Oceangate, that if you decide that you're going to do your own thing and take on every risk, there are consequences, and they are severe.
Hello, I'm Adam Hegarty. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minute segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.